Good afternoon, everyone. DMGeezerjim here, back to continue our classic modules reviews for 5th edition. This series, we kind of take a look at the old classics from basic BECME through 3rd edition, kind of take them apart, look at them in context of when they were written, what they were designed for, and how do they, first and foremost, can they be translated to 5th edition? What are some of the challenges that you might face, and if they're good candidates or not for 5th edition use? This is going to be part 2 of a series of, I guess, a couple pieces. Real quick, we are talking about Vault of the Drow today. As you may or may not know, this was a part of, I guess you could say, a 7-module series. It began with G1 through 3 against the Giants, where the party would go into the Hill Giant Fortress, kick some Hill Giant booties, and then make our way into the Glacial Rift of the Frost Giant, Jarl, and kick that booty and find another clue that takes them to the Fire Giant and King Snur. All 3 of those adventures took place in this one, published in 1978. Those actually lead them to the clue that the Dark Elves, the Drow, the heretofore unheard of bad guys, were actually the agents behind the activities of the Giants. So that led us into the module that we reviewed in our last time, Descent in the Depths of the Earth. This was the first major, the first real module that had our party spending a significant time underground. Prior to this, it was just go into a cave, kill the dungeon, go out. This was actually the first representation of the Underdark type campaign. This D1 and D2 were the first 2 parts of that dealt with the Troglodyte Lair and the Kuotoa Shrine, D1 and D2 respectively. It leads to D3, which will be our focus today, and the series culminates in Q1, Queen of the Demon Web Pits, which we will save for another episode. Forewarning, that will be long because the Queen of Demon Web Pits is pretty thick, even though it's a shorter book. Okay, but today, Dungeon Module D3, Vault of the Drow by Gary Gygax, published in 1978 as part of the same series. An adventure for characters levels 10 through 14. Back in 1st edition, 10 to 14 was considered a high-level campaign, similar to 5th edition. Before we go too far, I want to be clear that this is an excellent series. But if you're used to 5th edition presentations, if you're used to the 5th edition campaign books, and you suddenly drop back to this one, you're going to have some challenges. A lot of the construction, a lot of the preparation was left up to the Dungeon Master. These modules, some of the older modules are missing descriptive box text. If you find that necessary, these will be challenging for you to use. A lot of the newer modules are completely predicated around telling a story. The adventure book for 5th edition comes out, it's telling a story from the beginning to the end, and your party simply participates in that story. Your older modules are designed to give you a framework for your players to find the story. So a lot of times, if following me along in the series, you've heard me say the why is missing in this. Okay, that still carries true with this module. There is no real why given as far as, tying your characters from level 1 to level 12 into this module. At this point, you, the Dungeon Master, should have had your why. Your party has experienced a bunch of stuff to come up to this point. Old classic modules were not designed to take your characters from level 1 to level 15 while telling an entire story. Older classic modules, including this, were a component that you could adapt to your world and your player's story. So let's be clear on the front end. You may hear me say there is no why. That's not a criticism of the product as it sits, as it was published. That's an acknowledgement that expectations and standards are different 40 years later. That's all that I'm trying to say. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just, at the same time, we do want to understand that there is a little bit more prep, a little bit more information synthesis required to use the older modules in the 5th edition standard. So, be perfectly clear on that, because this one, especially when I wanted to preface the Vault of the Drow with that statement. This is a source book. It's not necessarily an adventure module. This is not going to tell your party to go from room 1 to room 2 to room 3 to room 11. This is actually basically providing the dungeon master with the information for the Drow city of let me get down so I don't say it wrong. I do mispronounce it. Erelai Sinlu. This is the stronghold of the Dark Elves. This is the target, the city that the party's getting to. The Vault of the Drow is this entire cave. I know it's kind of split across two. Let me go to a single pager and see if we can get a better view of it. Nope, sorry. Sometimes they can give us the whole map. Sometimes the PDF splits it. It is what it is. There, your party's coming into here. This cave is gigantic. It's monstrous. If you look at your scale, 1 hex equals 240 yards, which is 720 feet, which is roughly a quarter mile. So it's big. It's not huge. Okay, so according to 5th edition standards, you could cover this cave in 1 mile, 2 mile, 3 mile, 1 hour, 1 mile, 2 mile. It would take your party about 2 hours to walk from the entry to the vault to the entry of the city. So it's a big, wide open cave, but it's not so big that you're going to have to plan 50 days, 20 days worth of travel through it. Your party can cover the cave in a matter of hours, okay, based on the scale. So let's get into it. What does the module provide, and then we'll talk about how to adapt it. First and foremost, you get the map of the Vault of the Drow, and you get a quick key. You'll notice some of the locations numbered on here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 19, 20. Okay, 20 distinct locations. I'm going to tell you right now, this is your map. You get this map, you get a map of the High Fane, and you get some geomorphic maps. You've got to be ready as a DM, either have a bunch of, if you're going to do any significant time within the vault, you need to have some noble house maps, some large manor maps prepared. You need to have some tight alleyway, small street, dense, urban dense type maps prepared. Certainly need to have a couple guard tower maps, a wall or two map, and probably a couple temple maps. And this is just having them on hand. This isn't something that's actually stated in the module that's going to happen. This is preparation, because once your party gets here, they're trying to get to the High Fane of Loth, ultimately. How they get there is 100% up to them. There's not a lot of guidance or information provided in the module. Remember, this is a 10th level module. The assumption is by this point, you as the Dungeon Master know what your party is about, knows what their capabilities are, and know why they're here. The writer, KKA Gygax, doesn't, feels it's not necessary to give you a why. You're level 10, you already have your why. The reason that you're here, the mission has already been set up by you as the Dungeon Master. Your party's been progressing through it. Even if they're following the lead from the Giants, they're trying to find out why the Drow are stirring this up. It gets bigger than that, okay? So, let's get to the nuts and bolts. Again, you get random monster tables. The vast majority of these monsters will translate directly from 5th edition to 1st edition. You don't need to come up with a bunch of, you don't need to worry about coming up with a bunch of homebrew monsters, any of that. Pay attention to the number count. 1st edition, 2nd edition, BECME, the older editions, relied on number of creatures. Action economy wasn't a thing back then. You had a lot more flexibility, creativeness as a player. Environmental play was a standard thing back in the day. So most of your encounters are going to be overloaded with creature count. Pay attention to that if you need to. Certainly in relation to space, because the random monster tables that I'm looking at right here are in relation to the party moving through the tunnels. Some tunnels that your party's moving through are 15 feet wide. That's going to give you 3 square abreast in combat battle map terms for 5th edition. If you've got 25 bad guys in that tunnel, I think you see where I'm going. So you will have to prepare a little bit on your encounter numbers based on the space that you're using and the rule set that you're using. For 5th edition, there are some of these encounters 13 to 18 bugbears with 19 to 24 slaves. That could be an interesting encounter, both roleplay or combat-wise. Make sure you're prepared to deal with a minimum of 32 to a maximum of 42 counters on the board if you use that encounter as listed. Instantly, we're like, hell no. That's too many counters. That's too many pieces on the board. That's fine. But that's what I'm referring to. It's not nearly a question of oh, the party can't handle it, is a question of, do you want to manage it as a dungeon master? Back in the day when it was Theater of Mind, it wasn't a big deal. You just kept slashing until they were all dead, then you won. Now with counters, with movement, with space being represented on a table, you might be a little bit more cautious about mass combat, okay? That's going to apply to all the random tables. When you get a little bit further in here, if there's anything that needs specifics, this gives you the specifics. For example, the Dark Elf female fighters contingent versus the Drow male fighter contingents, so on and on. So there are a couple set piece encounters. Real quick as we continue, let me go down to the this map here. Okay. This is an old school map. In order to use this, you've got to get used to reading your coordinates, okay? It's going to tell us that at A2/31, there's an encounter. At L2/4243, there's an encounter. In this case, we're looking at Q2 and 49 according to the guide, okay? So that when you see this thing where it says R47, U48, Q49, that's what it's referring to. It's direct translation for the book that you're looking at versus how do I actually use it. Just simply quick grid yourself over on the map and you can find the location. A patrol area here, it tells you explicitly which map section of the geomorphs that you can use. Encounter piece 7, encounter piece 8, encounter piece 9, so on and so forth. What is that referring to? Real quick, let's scroll down. You see encounter piece 9, encounter piece 8, encounter piece 7. So they're all some small, quick little mini maps that you can drop into place and have. Again, virtual tabletop, real-time 5e, get these maps prepped on your own time. Theater of Mind, you're free to go with however you're going to use it, okay? So the encounters are varied. They're typical for your old edition D&D. They don't necessarily make the most ecological sense, but they do work. I will admit, some of the older modules don't do the greatest job of making sure dungeon ecology makes sense. Vault of the Drow, Descent of the Depths of the Earth, Gygax pays a little bit more attention to make sure that, if there's monsters down there, there's got to be something for the monsters to eat. We don't just randomly put disassociated monsters next to each other or have a hallway with two monsters that would fight each other given any other option. So ecology, dungeon ecology is a thing, and it is pretty well adhered to within here. So one of your encounter areas here can be a challenge. You, as a dungeon master, this is going to test your descriptive skills because this room is one gigantic illusion with a statuesque naked statue of a female standing in the middle of it. It's actually a succubus who's trying to charm people, and she's shacked up with her Drow dark elf vampire. So yeah, you've got a succubus and a vampire sitting in a small cave off to the side. That's a challenging fight for a group of level 9 or 10. Moderately challenging. Odds are they'll probably be able to deal with them pretty quickly, but that's the kind of thing that you're dealing here. It doesn't necessarily fit into the story unless you want it to. You can maybe put some tragic backstory about Belgos, the vampire dark elf, and tie him in with the city. You're given the flexibility to make this as important or as insignificant as you want to. There's a lot of treasure in here, though, so pay attention to that. The first encounter area, by the way, was just a guard post. Next one was interesting with a dark elf and a succubus couple that ambush unwary travelers. Again, illusionary use is a little bit different in 5e than it was back then. Difficulty checks, passives, all of that. Your mileage is going to vary depending on how you run those rules. But yes, this is a fun, potentially challenging encounter if you can present it that way. It should be kind of a culture shock for them to come into this room. There's tweeting birds in a small fountain, dripping water with flowers, and honestly, most of our cynical players are going to assume it's an illusion right off the bat, and that's fine. Players are going to play. So the next area here is a strange magical statue trap that can turn people into other statues as they go through. A bunch of spiders and all that. Just a simple combat encounter. If they touch the statue, a lot of spiders come attack them, so on and so forth. If they steal the mask off the statue, then they get cursed. Small side encounter, not connected to the vault on its own. Just a simple encounter area for your party to deal with. Let's get to the meat of the thing, the Vault of the Drow. Once again, you're referring to your Wandering Monster table. There are no set encounters in Vault of the Drow once you get to the vault itself. The predication is that the assumption, excuse me, is that you as a dungeon master have a plan, and these are your forces. This is a pile of your bad guys, and you do with them as you need to continue marching the adventure forward, okay? That's something that's a little different from modern sensibility, from the modern expectation. A dungeon master comes in and especially a brand new DM. Veterans, you know you know what I'm saying. You're like, okay, I got it. We're cool. New DMs, I need to emphasize that to you though. If you're picking up one of these classics and you're diving into the deep end, you're gonna feel a little bit hamstrung because, okay, I've got all these guards. What do I do with them? What would guards do if they saw a group of surface dwellers walking towards the front gate? Well, I don't want to kill them. Okay, but so you start seeing where it's going. It's in your brain as a dungeon master. It's not up to this book anymore. This book is not going to tell you or make you do specific things with your forces. This book is simply a collection of, from moving at this point forward, when we get to the Vault of the Drow, this is a collection of all the residents and all the troops within this vault, where they can be found, and what they will typically be doing. There are some reactionary notes. If your party fires on this, then that happens. But at this point, that's kind of an unknown. Now, I want to rewind a second here. Because the way these modules are written, some of the assumption is everything here is a bad guy. We have to fight our way through everything. No. There are several points along the way through D1 and D2 and certainly into D3 that your party can infiltrate the area. Your party can pretend to be allies. Your party may have done some good role play, some dialogue in the previous adventures, and you have found, you know, they're finding their way in there. That's something that again falls back in the dungeon master's lap. You might be able to seed something in the shrine of the Kuo-Toa, a MacGuffin of some sort that gives them free access to the city without getting jumped on by the guards. Maybe when they were going through the troglodyte lair, one of the drow that, you know, there's a checkpoint of dark elves that live there. Maybe something goes sideways and your party saves one of their lives. That's in your lap as a dungeon master. You have the information in D1 and 2. If you're creative, to set up an easier trip for D3. If the party has gone full murderer hobo and they've just been fighting their way into this, then they're going to continue having to fight a lot. Now, I will do a little bit of editorial comment here. If your party is in murder hobo mode, they should not make their way. They shouldn't survive this. They're going up against a city of dark elves. The lowest level thing in the city is 2. And that doesn't sound bad. Well, I'm level 10. That doesn't mean anything. There's 9,000 dark elves and an additional 10,000 non-dark elves that live in the city. 18,000 potential combatant enemies. So I need to re-emphasize, commoners are not a thing in the Vault of the Drow. Your lowest level individual is a second level fighter, and that's a male Drow. It starts there. So you're dealing with an elite population. Keep that in mind. A lot of times we've kind of gotten ourselves a little bit mixed up on the power curve. Every guard is a commoner. Every guard doesn't have to be a commoner. And in the case of this city, the absolute, in the city of Erelai Sinlu, the lowliest of guards is basically equivalent to a veteran. A level 2 fighter wouldn't quite be a veteran. But it's a CR1 instead of a CR1 quarter. Keep that in mind. So between 8,000 and 9,000 drow live in the city, and double that number of half-caste servants and slaves. We're up to 18,000. And then you can add an additional 1,000 or so travelers that move around the city. So the next section is actually talking about the city itself. You had your, well, this whole thing that we're scrolling back up through. The 16 stone warehouses at location 3, the colors of these line up with the merchant houses. The female fighter society over on the far south side of the wall. Remember, reinforcement that the dark elves in first edition And kind of in 5th edition are a matriarchal society. Women are on top. The females of the Drow species lead everything. The dudes at best are a second-class citizen. At worst are slave labor. Okay? So make sure you're putting an emphasis on that. A dude starts talking. If your party is male driven, a dark elf cleric, a drow female cleric, is not even going to want to hear a word that comes out of that inferior being's mouth, man. This is where you kind of lean into that mystique. One caveat: 5th edition dark elf lore doesn't necessarily tie in as well with your 1st edition dark elves. They have been nerfed. They have been a little bit more humanized, quote unquote, even though that's a bad thing. That's getting me down on the thing. They're a little bit more placid in 5th edition than they were in 1st and 2nd edition. So keep that in mind. If you're playing purely 5th edition, either A, if you're sticking with Greyhawk, then you've told your party to expect that. B, if you brought it onto your own campaign, it is what it is. Okay. So we're going into the stronghold itself at this point. You've got a nice map of the Great Fane of Loth. This is the temple. It's an ugly-ass map. Redo the map. First level, second, third, first, second, dungeon, so on and so forth. This is the church, the temple. Ironically, this is the great temple to Loth in the dark elf city of Erinlai Sinlu. I wouldn't be upset with you as a dungeon master if you redrew this and made it a larger map, personally. But that's up to you. Completely up to you. You got all these outside doors because it's kind of built up as a ziggurat type thing. Wasn't well represented here, but this is a ziggurat. So your second level is sitting on top of your first level. Your third level is sitting on top of your second, etc., etc. That's why you're seeing these doors on the outside going, what the hell do those connect to? Well, this is actually sitting on top of the first one. That's going to be the major conflict point as your party enters into the demon web itself. This is their access to Q1, Queen of the Demon Web Pits. The Great Fane of Loth is your climatic encounter for this module. Everything else here is, as I've said before, this is a roster of non-player characters, a roster of monsters, a listing of all the creatures and all the assets that are in play in the vault. This is not a list of, if your party goes to location 15, then this happens. That's not here. That's up to you to know. That's up to you to plan. That is adding a lot of thought and prep to your brain. Now, the plus side is your players, you know your players better than anyone else is going to go. They may not give a crap about the rest of this stuff on the outside, about all the noble villas, about the fungus forests, about the female fighter cloister. They could care less about it. They just want to go straight up the road and get on with their job. Fine. There's nothing that says they have to go out here. But the information is available for the remainder of the vault if your party chooses to explore. What can I do with all that space? Maybe you can add a little bit more to the noble houses. The merchant houses, the caravans that live outside of the city. They're always dying to get inside. Number 6 is the merchant villa. 16 of these, one for each clan. The small letter designates which clan, and they're all listed over here on the Prism clan, the Torntor clan, the Go Deeps, the Elisurs, the Alaval, the Kislex, Despania, Torntor, Noquar, and the Ever Hates, so on and so forth. So there's a handful of 13, 14 noble houses. If you're familiar with the Menzo Berenson, Drizzt to Erden stuff, House Bainray, House etc. etc. Same thing. Menzo Berenson stolen heavily from here. That's okay. If it's good, it's going to get stolen. That doesn't mean a bad thing. And honestly, Menzo Berenson is a little bit better than the Dark Elf Ironclad. I always say Ironclad Sithlu, but I know that's wrong. Aaron Lu. So, you could honestly, from a complete conversion standpoint, you could pull in Menzo Berenson's map and content and information in for an Erinlai Sinlu and not have a huge deal. You could potentially take the D1 and 2 and 3 and translate these into a trip for a party to penetrate into Menzoberranzan. These two modules work perfectly, transported into the 5th edition Forgotten Realms for an attack on Menzoberranzan or a raid or an exploration, however you want to do it. So the two products in conjunction are definitely still useful for 5th edition, even outside of their design, even outside of their scope. The information is still really useful, quick and simple to convert over to a different setting if you so choose. Okay, so again, as I'm scrolling through this, I know it's really boring because I don't want to say the module is boring. The presentation isn't the most engaging from the simple fact it's a roster. Again, I know I keep saying it, but because it's true. You have to have, as a dungeon master, you have to have a good idea what you're going to do with all of these forces when your party gets here. By the time your party has gotten here, they should have established how their interactions with the Dark Elves are going. Are they openly hostile? Are they, are they infiltrating? Did they make a couple deals with 2 of the houses to bring down 2 other houses? That's all in your context and your purview as a DM. If you're seeding those steps in here, you can certainly do that. They are not given, they are not listed. Those are the kind of the organic ideas that rather than codifying it, the original designers give us space to exercise those, if that makes sense. A lot of times, if you printed it, it became the expectation. If you didn't print it, then it's up to the DM to figure it out from there and have fun with it, okay? So yeah, some of the gaps, and I have been guilty about, kind of saying, oh, this is missing and that's missing. I'm doing a bad job of putting in the context that, as an experienced dungeon master, having gaps is a good thing because it gives you space to move the module around your story and your needs without breaking some sort of canon. So in this case, not having a structure, a railroad, a path for your party to follow is a good thing because your party is getting into a high-level event, a high-level encounter. Their behavior up to this point could have changed the entire trip into the vault. So there's no point in trying to codify options for a party at a higher level. It's more important to give us the information to build around what our parties choose to do. And Vault of the Drow does a good job of that. That is, once again, I'm at the risk of repeating myself, if you need something, if you need an adventure book to tell you who your characters are, what they're doing, why they're there, how they did it, how they got there, what order to go, and then how to finish it, this is not going to be a very useful supplement for you. If you're a world builder, if you're a DM that likes to have a framework and then fill it in, you have an idea or you like the idea of it, but you want the room to wiggle, this shit's perfect for you. Excuse my language. This is what it was. These are the things that are designed for you. You don't have to throw away a bunch of stuff. You've been given a foundation and a framework to build up from. But that requires time, that requires effort, and that requires a work on your part. So I don't know if there's a right or wrong. The lazy DMs probably won't like these. I know there's a whole category, I'm using air quotes, but yeah, there's a whole movement, an entire publication series, The Lazy DM's Guide to X, Y, and Z. But the funny thing is if you sat there and read those 7 books, you're not a lazy DM because you're prepping. But that's okay. So, what are we at here? This is simply, at this section, is the encounter key to the Great Fane of Loth. Okay? It's going to tell you this little map up here, what each of these rooms contain, and, what is contained in each of those rooms. Again, for example, an altar where offerings of goods are placed. It's covered with many spider shapes and 2 candles burn on either end. It bears an octagonal offering plate made of beaten gold, and the candle holders are onyx inlaid with gold. If your party wants to steal them, the value's there. That's all that's given. It's just a quick description of the room and what's in the room. Now exactly, for room number 9, 2 female fighters of 3rd level, armor class of 0, that would be armor class 20 in 5e terms. Armed with a +1 dagger, +1 short bow, and hand crossbows, which are coated with deadly poison. There's old school difficulty curve. Normal save throw versus poison, but failing equals death. So yeah, this little 3rd level fighter shoots you with a crossbow, gets lucky, you fail your con save, you're dead. No one wants to do that in 5e. You're a high level game. That's your encounter. Yes, you should be able to walk up to this chicken killer in one hit, but if you miss and she shoots you, bye-bye. The room is plain and sparsely furnished, a table, a few chairs, and a couch. All guards' bolts are thus invented. Doesn't tell you what the guards are going to do. You heard me read it off. You're sitting there looking at it. There is no information that says if the party does this, then the guards are going to do that. That's up to you. Use logic. Use common sense. If the party's making noise, those guards may not be in that room because they attacked the party on the stairs up to the front. That's one of the plus sides of not having every little thing detailed out for you as a dungeon master. You're given the flexibility to think tactically, to think strategically. But then you also have the responsibility not to bury your group under 642 fighters and clerics on round 3 and in the campaign. Balance point that we get. On and on. Like I said, this ironically is a very skinny module. You're looking at 36 pages, including one fold-out map of the Vault of the Drow. Inside you it contains the standard cavern map, which we talked about a little bit in D1-2. If you want more information about that, check the previous series. Just so you know, in context, D1 and 2 will take our parties from the entry cave all the way up to this point here. D3 gives you these 3 last locations and the vault itself. So D1 and, they're definitely designed to work together to accentuate, to supplement each other's journey. But yeah, ironically, as we scroll down, it's, these are information about each of the noble houses. Real quick, let me show you those on the map so we're being thorough. If you look at the little hexes on hexes, each of those has a number from 11 to 17. I think 17? Yep. 11 to 17. Each of those represent the 6 noble houses of eight noble houses of the Drow in here. You're given rosters for those houses. You're given information for the defensive forces. You're also given the device to describe the sigil, to describe the seal that they're wearing, the colors, the coat of arms, if you will. You've got House Everhate, House Tispana, House Naquar, House Alaval, House Kilsec, House Godeep, and the House of Eliserves. And then the Egg of Loth is the entry to the Great Fane of Loth, and your party works through. Okay, so guess what? We're at the credits here. Stat block for the Drow, stat block for the Kuo-Toa, stat block for Loth, Demon Queen of Spiders. She does make an appearance in the Great Fane. Your party will follow the Loth from the Great Fane into the Demon Web if they so choose, if you're running the campaign that way. Mesodaemons, Nicodaemons. What are those? Yugoloths, Mesoloth, Nikoloth. They used to be called daemons. During the Satanic Panic, daemon became Yugoloth, and that's where we are now. Few new monsters made their appearances back in the day. Swerf Neblins, deep gnomes have been around since 78. And just for shits and grins, your back cover shows you everything that was available for a Dungeons and Dragons player back in 1978. Player's Handbook, DM's Guide, Monster Manual, Deities and Demigods, Dungeon Master Screen, Adventure Log. A lot of this stuff is little crap. So, but it's just a fun little look to say, oh wow, there was some crazy shit back then. And here you have a picture of your Dark Elf Vampire and the Succubus Girlfriend that was found earlier in the cave. That's it, guys. That's the module. Not a bunch to it. A lot in it, but not a lot to it, if that makes sense to you. The entire population of the Drow city is accounted for. The entire order of battle for their forces, both within the city, at the manors, and at each of the noble houses is accounted for. Additional adventure locations are given as well should your party need them. What is not accounted for are detailed battle maps of anything. The city is not mapped out down to, by the building, by the street, anything. There's descriptions for the city. They're not mapped out. You don't have maps for the noble villas. If your party's going to interact with any of the noble villas or any of the merchant villas, be prepared to come up with some maps, or at least theater of mind it. The only actual battle map, the map within the vault is given, is the Fane of Loth. So, in a modern 5th edition view, this is a good module as a source book, okay? This is a great module as an extension of the campaign. On its own, if you were to find this sucker on a shelf, you didn't look at the Giant series, you didn't look at the Descent series, and you had no idea what the Queen of the Demon Web series, it's a little light. You're not given an adventure as much as you're given a set of locations and who lives there and what lives there. That's not a bad thing. If you were just to simply pick this up, then all that means is you have access to an underground Drow city that you can connect to the surface world however you want, and you have all the information you need to stock this city. And you're not stuck with running it in a specific way because it's your city now. So that's not a criticism. It is somewhat critical of the module because on its own, it doesn't make much sense. In context of the series, it's absolutely a necessity. As a source book, it's very useful. It can give you some information on moving through the Underdark. It gives you a population count and some stat blocks. Well, let's ignore the stat blocks. We're playing 5th edition. But at least a roster of troops and people for the city. What it is lacking is the behavior. You as a dungeon master are required to give the city its personality. This was written when there was an assumption all dark elves behave this way. So you don't have to go too far into that stratification of it. If you're playing in Forgotten Realms, or if you consider yourself a DM with modern sensibilities, you have the freedom to do what you need to with the city because you're not obligated to do anything with this city as it is as a source book. So if you have if you're in the mood for kinder, gentler Drow, there's nothing in this book that's limiting you to going on with chaotic evil loth worshipping Drow at all fronts. Heck, I mean, just as a quick homebrew suggestion for this, if you're bound to Forgotten Realms lore, then you're familiar with Menzo Berenzin, you're familiar with the fight between Caranthali and Loth. Maybe you make this the capital city for Caranthali's people. You can teleport. I say teleport. You can completely port this location into any other campaign. It's a cave, man. It's a big-ass cave. That fits into any geometry. So in a roundabout sort of way, even if you don't end up using this as part of the GDQ series, you still gain the benefit of having a fleshed-out, complete, described, well, let me rephrase, because it's not fleshed out, it's not complete, they didn't describe. You have the foundations to build a dark elf city, you have the guidelines to populate the city, and you have some encounter tables to have your party interact with the city. You have the bare minimums that you need to take a location and turning it into a working underground city. But yeah. So overall, just to kind of close out the series here, not close out the series, the second part of the series, D1, we're going to do D3. I will be doing Q1, Queen of the Demon Web Pips. Forewarning, when we get into Q1, it's going to be a lot longer than the ones we've done for D1 and 2 because there's a lot going on in the Demon Web. Maybe that's another thing to think of. The middle part of this, trek seems a little bit light, seems a little bit short on adventure. The finale takes it back up exponentially more difficult, so, maybe uses a break. Like I said, as an adventure module, as something that you're going to sit down in front of, and this gives your party things to do, Vault of the Drow is a little bit weak. In that the book itself is not giving your characters things to do. The book is giving you, the Dungeon Master, tons of stuff to turn into encounters. So if you're having a hard time using Vault of the Drow, maybe that might be a little bit more on you as a Dungeon Master, not realizing that you, rather than not having guidance, you have freedom. When you take away the guardrails, when you take away the railroady part of the adventure that says first party talks to him, then they go to there, then they must go to there, it adds work to you as a Dungeon Master, but it gives you the freedom to adapt it to what your party needs, where they are at in that point in time. So even though some of the older modules are a little bit lacking in the nice maps, they may not always have the why. They may have some gaps in the story. The expectation is you're supposed to fill those in. The story is, the module is there to guide you along, to give you a framework to customize to your players. 5th edition versus 1st edition, dramatically different. I'm not even talking the rules. I'm talking about the writing and the adventure design. Okay? So keep that in mind. when you're going back, this was in a time where you're using military historians, war gamers, giving us products that we can use for our games. You're not having novelists giving us stories that we can put our players in. So that's kind of the big difference. Not a knock on old, not a compliment on good, just on new. Just an acknowledgement of the differences in the presentations and the styles. Okay, but I'm going to wrap this sucker up. Once again, Dungeon Module D3, Vault of the Drow, written by Gary Gygax, published in 1978. The third, I guess we would say the sixth in a 7-module series, starting with the G1 through 3 against giants, leading into the D1 and 2 descents into the depths of the earth. The party finds themselves at the end of their journey catching their breath, resupplying, and either ducking or working with the dark elves of the vault so they can make their way into the demon web pits and confront Loth. Cool? Cool. All right, guys. DMGeezerjim here. I'm finishing up this last little bit. Thank you for your time, whether you're here for the full time, few minutes, catching it bit by bit. Doesn't matter. I appreciate your time. If you want to join me for some live discussions, I'm over on Twitch Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Central to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. More than happy to pull up any of the stuff, sit and chat about it. We learn from each other. Even though I do like talk, I appreciate the input. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the feedback. If we're not talking with each other, we're living in echo chambers. We're not learning from each other. So please, if you got comments, if you got feedback, throw them in the comments. I want to participate. I want to engage with you guys. You're giving me your time to listen to these videos and learn from it. I want to share that back and have the discussions with you if you guys want. But above all else, thank you for joining me for this section of the series. We'll be back for another episode for the Queen of the Demon Web Pips and a lot more. Look at some of the other playlists. I'm getting back to where I have some time to start updating my stuff again. Get the YouTube channel geared up. Obviously, we'll be kicking some Planescape into gear. But above all else, thank you for your time. Like, follow, subscribe, do all of the cool button pushes, and we'll catch you on the next time. Be safe.